gardener who worked in a garden from morning till twilight, and there were 2 children who belonged to the garden. The gardener was brown, and his skin was rough like the bark of an old apple tree. The children thought him the most magical of men. They would search him out in the potting shed and follow him down to the vegetable garden, listening while he dug among the carrots or hoed the flower beds. As he told them stories, all the while prodding at the lumps of earth as if each clod were a part of a jigsaw to be pushed here and there till it fell into its rightful place. Sitting on upturned flower beds, the children waited for the story to begin. A long way back, began the gardener, settling himself more comfortably on a wooden box and slowly unwrapping his sandwiches. When I was a lad, a mere garden boy, sweeping up leaves in the autumn, weeding the summer away, your grandma had a dog called Quang. He was a hairy beggar, a great fluffy face he had, just like them chrysanthemums I grow come autumn. When Quang was a puppy, your grandpa brought him back from foreign parts, from a land called Tibet, a strange land, all mountains and snows and holy people and such like. Of course, that was long before the time I'm speaking of now, when I was a garden lad. Quang was an old dog, and the memory of his native country was but a vague remembrance of voices chanting and snowflakes falling like frozen waterfalls. Your grandma had quite a few dogs, having a fancy for them, but they all respected Quang. He was old and wise and very bad-tempered. Quang was an early riser. As soon as the door was open and the smell of morning, of wet grasses and patches of unexplored garden blew in through the hall, Quang would stretch his great paws, unfurl his flag-like tail above his back, and waddle into the garden. Like a detective, he examined each smell with care. None of the other dogs would have dared disturb him, while he dreamed and pondered over a clump of daisies, or maybe a tree stump. On this particular morning, he was, as usual, the first out of doors. At 8 o'clock, the other 4 dogs came barking and scampering down from your grandma's bedroom, making a commotion fit to deafen the devil. There was a beagle, a sort of hound on short legs. There was a pug, a small bustling person, beige body, tall tail in tight curl, and hideous black wrinkled face. A real havoc of lines and creases. Then there was Minette, the poodle of her and her apricot-coloured son. I think he was a bit soft in the head. A silly dog anyway, not like his mother. Minette stood for a moment on the doorstep, her nose turned upwards. A real little madam. She was vain, her brushed white hair standing about her like a veil. Then for all the world, like a bride or a small white cloud, she floated into the garden. A dainty thing she was, tripping along on her toes, her sissy son at her heels. "Good morning, Quang," she said, all haughty, but mindful to keep a respectful distance, lest Quang should be in a biting mood. "Morning," mumbled Quang, his nose buried in a box hedge. Minette ruffled her fur bracelets and stamped her back legs on the grass. She was a real little flirt. She blinked her eyelashes at Quang and said, "I've got some news for you." "Be quiet," replied Quang crossly. "Can't you see I'm thinking?" And he pushed himself further into the box hedge. Then, after a good deal of scraping and scratching and rustling, his voice muffled by the leafy branches, asked, "What is it?" "She has brought your wife. The dogs all called your grandma she." "A what?" growled the ancient Quang. "A wife," echoed the apricot son, and got a bite in his ear for his impudence. "But I don't want a wife," barked Quang, struggling out of the hedge and glaring at the idiot son. "Too bad," called Minette, and as she disappeared indoors with her son running after her. Quang pondered on this piece of news for a long moment. He thought he had better go and see for himself. A wife, he grumbled. A wife! I don't want a wife. Blast those ruddy human beings. Always interfering with a chap. Why can't they mind their own business? She always had her breakfast in bed, so Quang had to climb the steep staircase to her bedroom. It took him a long time to mount the stairs. He was getting old fellow and his limbs ached. The bedroom door was open and he hurried to the bedside. He loved your grandma dearly, but he wasn't one for making a song and dance about it. He licked her hand and accepted the biscuit he was offered. It was only then that he saw, sitting on the satin eiderdown, a brown and white hairy dog in his own image. The biscuit fell from his mouth onto the floor. He took a look at the creature. She had round pink rimmed eyes and a round pink mouth. "Oh!" cried the stranger in a shrill voice. "Ah!" said Quang in a tone of utter disgust. With a reproachful look at his mistress, he left the room. He wandered out into the meadow, the better to think. He plodded slowly through the grasses, his head and tail two sailing boats bobbing up and down among the buttercups. He sat by the river thinking over his problem. It was there, watching the river, that the ripples tugging at the wild irises, spilling to the water lilies, this way and that, watching the water play with the kingcups, yellow heads nodding, that Quang decided he must find a new home. The whole of creation seemed busy, a million creatures delightfully performing as many tasks. The bees did the over blossom, the flowers turning their placid faces to the sun and seemingly unaware of the attention they were attracting. The birds, like coronation choirs, singing great bursts of song. Quang felt very alone amidst so much joy. "I never thought they'd go and do that to me," he muttered. "Me!" said Quang.
Okay.
The wise Quang. "There is no alternative. I shall have to leave."